Good evening and welcome to the 18th Annual Global Leadership Awards. I am Ivo Dalder, President of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Tonight will be a very different gala. The world has changed dramatically since we met last year, and so too has the Council. But what hasn't changed is the tremendous community that supports our work. And so I'm delighted that so many of you are joining us this evening from the comforts of your homes. While we remain socially distant, we can still come together as a council, your council, to share ideas, discuss important global issues, and be inspired by stories of those who make the world a better place. Today, more than ever, we all need the inspiration that will engage with and honor tonight. Our nation is being tested in ways that few of us have experienced ever before. The worst pandemic in 100 years has stricken nearly 9 million Americans and killed more than 225,000 of our fellow citizens. More than 20 million Americans have lost their jobs, and many more have seen their income slashed in the deepest economic crisis in 90 years. The pandemic and the economic fallout have also laid bare fundamental fault lines in our society around systemic injustice, deep-seated racism, and endemic inequality. As we address these issues and navigate uncertainty about what the future holds, the Council is working hard to bring important conversations and viewpoints to the people that need them most, from the interested public to the next generation to policymakers around the world, and from Chicago to a growing network around the globe. For almost 100 years, the Council has sought to build an inclusive and diverse community of individuals who seek to understand the challenges that affect people in Chicago, the United States, and around the world. Now, more than ever, our mission to engage the public with fact-based and balanced views is vital. Now, this evening marks an occasion to reflect on the Council's role on the path forward as we approach our centennial in February 2022. The organization is in a deep modernization process aimed at enhancing our work. As part of this, the Council is fully committed to engaging the public in global affairs discussions by curating relative and timely content, to influencing the discourse on important U.S. foreign policy issues through the Lester Crown Center on U.S. Foreign Policy, elevating global cities as central actors shaping the world, and advancing a sustainable, safe, and nutritious and global food system. And of course, we want to position the next generation to take leadership roles as we build a diverse and inclusive community of members. To continue this work and fulfill our mission as the premier nonpartisan global affairs organization in America's heartland, the Council relies on the continued support from the Chicago community, from the knowledge, ideas, and solutions that are shared, to the funds that you help us raise, to the Council. It depends on your support and engagement. So I'd like to acknowledge our Board of Directors, our Chairman and Director Circle leaders, and the members of the President's Club, and of course our general members, as well as many of our corporate partners and organizations that have continued to support the Council throughout the year. To all of you, thank you. We could not do our work without you. And now I'd also, of course, like to express my sincerest appreciation to our hosts, John and Mary Manley, for their generous and continued support. For the last 18 years, they have been hosts of the Global Leadership Awards dinner. And thank you, John and Mary, for continuing to do so this year. On behalf of the Council, I'd also like to offer our thanks to our event chairs, Jen Lee Scanlon, Donna and Sam Scott, Carol Siegel, and Rick Waddell. The success of this event is due to your remarkable efforts, and we appreciate all you continue to do for the Council. I'm so pleased to announce that the 2020 Global Leadership Awards has raised over $1.3 million to support our work. We're so appreciative and thankful for your support. Thank you for recognizing the important role the Council plays in our community, in this region, in the country, and indeed around the globe. Tonight, though, we are here to celebrate three incredible global leaders who are impressed with their vision, their integrity and dedication, and provide inspiration and stability when society needs them most. We take this opportunity to honor the extraordinary achievements of Dr. Paul Farmer, Dr. Helene Gayle, and Keith Williams for their leadership in advancing equity in global health and safety. This evening, we will hear from our three honorees and from some of their colleagues and friends who will provide background and share their insights into our honorees' contributions. We all look forward to hearing their distinct and poignant stories throughout the evening. My hope is that you'll leave feeling inspired and encouraged by the work of our honorees and the example they set for building a more equitable and indeed a better world. To get things started, I'd like to welcome Jenny Scanlon, President and CEO of UL, who will introduce our first honoree of the evening.
Good evening. It is my honor to introduce Keith Williams, the Council's 2020 Global Leadership Award honoree. for his significant contributions to advancing equity in health and safety for people around the world. When Keith became the 10th president and CEO of UL in 2005, he had already spent 11 years of his career living across Asia, including Singapore, Beijing, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. Quite a global trajectory for a man who was born in Hastings, Nebraska. In his 15 years as CEO, Keith led a transformation at UL, guiding our journey from a nonprofit to delivering business solutions in safety testing while staying true to our now 126-year-old mission of making the world a safer place. Keith enriched UL's culture, focusing on groundbreaking safety research to improve people's lives, advancing innovation and science to improve safety, security, and sustainability. When I became president and CEO of UL last year, I traveled with Keith to Tokyo, Singapore, Seoul, Beijing, and Shanghai, and witnessed UL employees in their outpouring of warm wishes to Keith on his retirement as they bid him a fond farewell. Keith's business acumen, sensitivity to cultural diversity, and his strong relationship with customers contributed to UL's success. His active engagement with governments, public officials, universities, and businesses around the world accelerated the latest safety advancements and further established UL's global leadership. UL's work serves people and communities around the world, from supporting product safety, security, and sustainability to ensuring workplace safety training and indoor air quality. Many organizations have benefited from Keith's international experience and interests. He currently serves as Chairman Emeritus of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council and is on the board of Opera Memphis. He also serves on the Board of Advisors for the Clark School of Engineering at the University of Maryland. And of course, one of his responsibilities I know he highly values is his role on the board of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Keith is a shining example of using his position to improve the lives of the people in Chicago community, our nation, and in the global cities around the world. We thank Keith for his dedication and his efforts. His exemplary leadership will have a lasting impact, and he serves as an example of what it means to be a truly global leader. It is indeed a pleasure to honor Keith for his significant and long-lasting contributions to equity in health and global safety. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Jenny. Next, we'll shift the focus to our national honoree, Dr. Helene Gayle, President and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust. To introduce her and share their insights on her work, we'll hear from Sam Scott, co-chair of the board at the Council of Global Affairs, and from Linda Wolf, honorary life director at the Council and executive committee member at the Chicago Community Trust. Take it away, Sam.
Thank you, Ivo, and good evening to all. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you my friend and this year's national honoree, Helene Gayle. While Helene's important work at the Chicago Community Trust focuses on the Chicago area, her leadership and expertise advocating for well-being of others extends far beyond Chicago's borders. For almost a decade, Helene was president and CEO of CARE, a leading international humanitarian organization. She's an expert on global health and development issues. She spent 20 years with the Center for Disease Control and worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation directing programs on HIV and AIDS. She has devoted her career to finding solutions for global domestic health issues, poverty alleviation, gender equality, and social justice. Chicago was very lucky 3 years ago when Helene decided to accept her position at the Chicago Community Trust. And my wife Donna and I are also very happy that she and Stephen came to Chicago because we made two very good new friends. Since taking over the reins, she has adopted a new strategic focus on closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap in Chicago. This ties directly into the work she's been doing throughout her entire career, dealing with public health challenges. I have had the opportunity to work personally with Helene on projects in Chicago. She really digs in, she knows what she's talking about, and ties things together in a comprehensive way so that the outcomes are such that the desired change really happens. In closing, I would like to thank Helene for her unwavering determination to make people's lives better. We all benefit from her leadership and her guidance. Congratulations, Helene, on tonight's award.
Good evening. I'm Wolf, and I'm so pleased to speak to you about Helene Gayle and how she has dedicated her life to helping the underserved. From her work on HIV/AIDS at the CDC and Gates Foundation to her leadership at CARE, Helene has brought her expertise to help solve the issues of health and poverty globally. At CARE in particular, Helene led efforts to empower women and girls to lead lasting change in poor communities. 3 years ago, Helene brought her global experience to Chicago. Back then, I was on the search committee for the Chicago Community Trust, and we were looking for a new CEO. We interviewed a number of candidates, strong candidates, but Helene clearly stood out based on the breadth and depth of her experience. We were delighted when she accepted our offer. We felt that her global perspective would be invaluable in addressing the issues that we were dealing with in Chicago. Of course, she's exceeded our expectations. Helene has brought a renewed vision and a focus to the Trust. The Trust vision is for a thriving, equitable, connected Chicago, where people of all races, places, and identities have the opportunity to reach their potential. Under Helene's leadership, the Trust is working on some of the biggest challenges in the region, many stemming from racial and ethnic wealth inequality. Given the current situation, Helene's leadership is needed now more than ever as we work to reform and rebuild our community. I'm so pleased to recognize Helene's work at the Chicago Community Trust and her significant contributions to advancing equity in health and safety for people around the world.
Thank you, Linda, Sam. It's wonderful to hear about Helene's impressive background and her work at the Chicago Community Trust. And now we're turning our attention to this evening's global honoree. I'm very pleased to welcome our host, John Manley, Council Vice Chair and President of Chicago City Capital Group, who will introduce Dr. Paul Farmer.
Thank you, Ivo, and good evening. When our global honoree tonight, Dr. Paul Farmer, came to the Council in November of 2013, there were about 1,000 people there, a turnout more often associated with the visiting head of state. While everyone increasingly seems young, I think I can objectively say that night a much more than usual number were in fact young. Mary and I were there for at least the first part. We were in the second row right behind Ivo and Elise. I can only imagine Paul as a handler's worst nightmare, because characteristically for Paul, and I will dare guess for perhaps the only time in the almost 100 years of the Council, a speaker made himself available afterward to listen and talk with those who still wanted to until 3 a.m. In the 80s at Harvard Medical School, he practiced distance learning 36 years ahead of his time. The first 2 years of medical school were mostly large lectures, and Paul earned the moniker Paul Foreigner as he spent his class time in Haiti, accompanying the poor as a yet-to-be licensed doctor. He would return to Boston and surface for exams in the occasional lab while still earning high marks. He wrote thousands of flashcards then. Even now he writes flashcards, although fewer, to help keep himself abreast of what's new in medicine. Partners in Health, which he co-founded 33 years ago, has all the hallmarks and metrics of something big and important. Number of lives saved, number of lives touched, geographic reach, an influential voice in high places with important people. When Bill Clinton called a 20-year-old Chelsea in 2000 to tell her what he had read about Paul Farmer, she told him they had already met, and that Dr. Farmer was the Albert Schweitzer of her generation. But the importance and success of Partners in Health and Paul Farmer is not top-down, but in the living of core values from the ground up, through the eyes of those they are accompanying. Accompanying is a word Paul Farmer uses a lot. It is different from giving aid. It asks the question, what would you do for someone you really love? And then invites you to see that all lives have equal value. What would cost too much, be too hard, take too much time, or be abandoned because it was inefficient if you love someone? It is about radical availability, helping overcome barriers the person you're accompanying sees, and taking down boundaries between you and those you would accompany. Paul read the 1,000-plus pages of War and Peace when he was 11. I don't know, but can only imagine he also read Tolstoy's fable of only a few pages called The Three Questions. It is how he lives. Who is most important? The person in front of you. What is the most important time? Now. What is the most important thing? To do good. Thank you, all of you who are here tonight and who have supported the Council for so many years. Now let's look at a short video put together by Partners in Health.
You know, looking back over the last 30 years, it's a remarkably simple model. The people trained like me, the professionals, blame the patients for their bad outcomes. When we took the blame off the patients and put it on the system, everybody got better.
And Partners in Health was formed.
Everything we do was with the community and for the community.
It's about rejecting despair and cynicism. Yes, there are people who are cynical about it, but, you know, they're wrong.
Paul is the chancellor of UGAG, a place where he can expand his vision of his life's work. Gordon and I are proud to partner with Paul to make access to health a human right.
To pull 1 million people out of poverty in the last several years, to build stable institutions where none existed. To me, that is about hope. And it's about rejecting despair and cynicism. You know, those are the two biggest dead ends we've got. Despair and cynicism. You know, we have not reached that goal. And, you know, health for all still needs to be the future.
Rejecting despair and cynicism. That's powerful. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, John, for that amazing introduction. We look forward to hearing from all our honorees later this evening. But first, I'd like to give you some insight on where the Council is 9 months into the COVID crisis and where we're heading. To meet this moment and to continue our work during these trying times, we have accelerated our transformation into a digital think tank as we work to increase and diversify our digital offerings and explore new and innovative ways to engage with you online. In March, we shifted from an in-person events to a completely virtual organization, and many more people are now finding us on demand, be it at YouTube, downloading Deep Dish Podcast, or setting their clock to watch World Review every Friday morning. In the past 6 months, we hosted over 100 virtual programs and meetings. We've seen among the largest audiences engaging with our work in the history of the Council. Our digital programming capabilities have made it possible to explore the historic events of 2020. From their homes, audiences have learned about how COVID-19 has affected food security, supply chains, jobs, and international cooperation. How racial disparities within healthcare, education, the economy, and the criminal justice system have affected the United States and our global standing. And how the election will affect key foreign policy topics such as the future of defense and trade, as well as relations with China and our presence in the Middle East. We are expanding the conversation, reaching people across the nation and around the world by making it easier and more convenient than ever to access and participate in our digital events. These are not temporary changes to address the challenges posed by the pandemic. They are only the beginning. This is an evolution of how the Council will deliver on its mission over the long term. It is an investment and commitment to a digital future. As we adapt our work to fit our new reality, your support is needed more than ever. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible contribution tonight, please use the link listed below or provided in the chat function. We value your engagement and thank you for all that you do. Enhancing our ability to deliver innovative and engaging experiences is the core to fulfilling the Council's mission as we enter our second century. I'm excited to share more about the Council's evolving digital work and its impact as we continue to step up our efforts to showcase the views and opinions of the Midwest and beyond to our growing global audiences. Take a look.
How we all work, live, and connect with each other has changed profoundly in 2020. And the Council's digital transformation has accelerated to provide engaging experiences and content for our members and audiences in Chicago and around the world. Investments in digital capabilities have made it possible for us to continue exploring rapid global change, what it means, and how it affects you and your life. We are addressing the most important questions facing our world and why they matter, offering you analysis that goes beyond the news and the headlines, and providing opportunities for you to engage and interact from anywhere in the world with the thought leaders shaping global affairs. This is not a temporary solution to the greatest challenge of our time. It's the future of the Council. Digital experiences will complement our in-person convenings well into our second century. And it is possible because of support from you, our members and donors, all who are part of this community that believes access to fact-based and balanced views on global issues helps to ensure effective U.S. engagement and supports a more inclusive, equitable, and secure world.
We're pleased to have so many of you joining us here this evening, and we hope to see all of you virtually for programming throughout the year. Whether you recently joined as a member, have been a member for decades, shared our content with others, or participated in a recent live stream, we are grateful for your commitment to the Council and its mission. Thank you for your generous support tonight and throughout the year. I'd like to take a moment to recognize tonight's co-chairs, vice chairs, and patron sponsors. And now on behalf of the Council, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to everyone who supported this evening's event. I'm excited at this point to welcome Decomposed, a Chicago-based chamber music group that honors Black creativity and culture. Please welcome Corey Coleman, Executive Director of Decomposed.
Good evening. My name is Corey Coleman, and I am the founder and Executive Director of Decompose. Decompose is a chamber music experience that celebrates and honors Black creativity and culture through the music of Black composers. Our goal is to redefine as well as reimagine the classical music experience. Tonight, we have a very special performance just for you, and I believe that the song will resonate with everyone, especially during this time. So without further ado, I present to you Decompose performing Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come, arranged by composer Joel Thompson. Enjoy and thank you.
Thank you to Decompose for that really moving performance and for the amazing mission that you are holding towards. We've now been introduced to each of this evening's honorees. We've heard their impressive backgrounds, remarkable moments of leadership, their inspiring life's work. And so the time has come to hear from them, to hear in their own words how we can make this world a better and more equitable place. From international humanitarian aid to government service, from community-based action to corporate leadership, our honorees have individually and collectively affected millions of people around the world, and their stories exemplify the Council's commitment to ensuring an inclusive, equitable, and more secure world. I'm pleased to welcome our three honorees for a panel discussion. Paul Farmer, Helene Gayle, and Keith Williams, along with our moderator, Eartharin Cousin, Distinguished Fellow in Global Food and Agriculture here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, Ivo. I'm pleased to be with you this evening. And I thank you all for joining us for the Global Leadership Awards. First, as a reminder, the Council is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan platform. The views expressed by individuals are their own and do not represent the institutional positions or views of the Council. Now let's begin. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome this evening's honorees, Dr. Paul Farmer, Dr. Helene Gayle, and Mr. Keith Williams. Thank you all for being with us and for your leadership advancing equity in global health and safety. We've heard from your friends and your colleagues on your extraordinary backgrounds and important work. So let's jump right into this discussion, beginning with you, Mr. Williams. During your tenure at UL, the company became a global corporate leader in safety, testing, and certification. What would you say were the company's most critical successes addressing equitable access to safety products, tools, and information for the diverse communities around the world?
Eartharin, good evening, and thank you for that question. I think UL's biggest contribution over the last 15 years has been its passionate involvement and investment of its own resources into the research of safety science. It's one of the very few organizations in the world that has that interest and that passion. And it's been focused in some key areas: batteries, which, as we know from one of our local companies, has been a big issue with safety; indoor air quality, which is a major issue and where UL has done a lot of work with universities in China, especially looking at how it affects children. But most importantly, I think in fire, where UL's deep research in fire safety led to a new standard for smoke alarms, which will make the whole world safer, which has led to a whole new approach to making furniture fire safe, free from toxins, and affordable, and for new approaches for firefighters to more safely fight residential fires and high-rise fires, thus saving both the residents and the firefighters.
That's amazing. And it's to know that that good work that you performed was beneficial to people from all communities around the world, and not just in the U.S. and Europe. Dr. Gayle.
I think. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say an important part.
Oh, please do.
Part of what UL did. Important part of what UL has done is to publish all of that information freely, so that everyone in the world can have access to it. Because UL has always believed that science and information of science that can make the world safer should be broadly shared and without fee or restriction.
And making information broadly shared is one of the keys to ensuring that we have equitable access to that research, that important research and information. Let's go to you, Dr. Gayle. Your professional career has spanned international and domestic development and engagement. You're now at the Chicago Community Trust, and you direct investments and lead investments into local organizations addressing areas of inequity. Under your leadership, how does the trust identify and select the most effective investments to address disparities across communities? And what metrics does the trust apply to measure the impact of your investments in these communities?
Yeah, thanks so much, Earthren, and it's wonderful to be here with my fellow awardees this evening. So about a year ago, the Trust developed and rolled out a new strategy, and it's focused on closing the racial and ethnic wealth gap here in the Chicago region. And we did that because we recognize that access to assets and wealth is really underneath so many other issues and really the underpinning of what gives somebody the ability to live a healthy and safe life. And so we said, if we could have an impact on closing this wealth equity gap, we could have a real impact more broadly. And so we've developed a strategy that looks at how you can increase wealth at the household level, how you can drive investments into neighborhoods that have been disinvested and underinvested in, and how do you empower communities and lift their voices so that the voices of community are at the table. And those three ways are the ways in which we want to be able to really address this issue of the wealth gap, looking at the kinds of investments that help to grow small businesses, that allow people to purchase homes, that drive private sector engagement into disinvested neighborhoods, where we know that there has been a disproportionate impact on communities that have not had access to capital. And then again, how do we make sure that neighborhoods and communities are at the center and at the heart of those things? So that's the way in which we're looking at it. And really, we have a 10-year strategy to look at how can we actually close that gap so that the medium income and the median wealth between Black and Latinx communities is closer, if you will, to that of white. So how do we close that gap between Black and Latinx communities and white communities in Chicago? Because we know that drives so many other things.
Thank you, Dr. Gayle. Dr. Farmer, you've spent your career working in many of the most challenged communities across the globe. And today, 50% of people around the world lack access to essential health services. As I said, you've worked tirelessly to provide equitable health care in many of these communities. Yet, what would you suggest? And let me rephrase that. Many would suggest that Partners in Health operates in these communities as a model for how civil society organizations should engage with the actors in a community when delivering service. What defines and differentiates the Partners in Health community engagement model? And how can these approaches be best applied to community service and engagement here at home in the United States?
Thank you. And Earthren, it's such a pleasure to be here, especially with Helene and Keith as they're honored as well. You know, as far as Partners in Health work goes, you know, somebody has to deliver care. You know, somebody has to be doing the work of taking care of the critically ill and injured. And, you know, when that does not happen, and, you know, Helene has seen a lot of this in her work over the years, as you have too, in places where there's, you know, grotesque food insecurity. When there are not healthcare professionals to provide that care, then it's done by traditional healers and family members. And it only takes a couple of pandemics to remind you that they're not well protected. They don't have the protection they need. And, you know, back to the general question of what, you know, defines Partners in Health. Yeah, well, unfortunately, it's still all too rare for people to be providing basic healthcare services for those who can't pay for them or those who don't have insurance programs. And we're seeing that happens in wealthy countries as well as poor ones. Wealthy and egalitarian countries without a strong safety net are going to see the sort of things that we're seeing in the United States right now, that
Helene is having to address in Chicago. And then back to the last part of that question, some of what defines this work, I think, is the commitment to accompaniment. That is, what are the health problems in a community? How do you empower those who live in those communities to respond effectively to them? And how do you not direct people to do things, but walk with them as they address their healthcare problems with the resources they need? That's really, I think, the MO of Partners in Health. And one thing that we've learned in building up the capacity to provide basic medical services and complex ones in these clinical deserts is we've learned about the importance of everything from electronic medical records to community health workers. And we've tried to bring some of that back to the United States, particularly in Massachusetts, in responding to the COVID-19 crisis.
So, Keith, let me come back to you for a second. When Paul was talking about the work they do to engage communities, it reminded me that we often talk about the need for multi-sectoral action as a foundation for successfully addressing our nation's most intractable challenges, specifically inequality and systemic racism, access to health, access to education, access to wealth, as Helene was just describing. Following your long career in business, how do you see the role of the private sector evolving as a key actor to achieving solutions to some of these intractable problems? And what actions, investments, or policies do you think are required for the private sector to work more productively with civil society and governments to address these issues?
Earthern, I think, from my experience, public-private partnerships can produce an awful lot of value if they're embraced by all the parties. So, for example, in the business I just recently retired from, there is a reliance and a cooperative effort between companies in the U.S. who develop standards and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. And while the CPSC has regulatory power and could, in fact, use it to regulate product safety, they rely on private standards, which are privately developed, and cooperation from industry. And they always refer to that policy as voluntary but not optional. And what it means is that as long as industry is voluntarily conducting good safety programs, the government will allow them to do that without government intervention. And at the same time, if the industry stops to do it or if the policy fails, then the government has power. And I think that can be applied more broadly just beyond product safety. For example, in education, one of the great models that I've seen, which I would love to see embraced more by industry and frankly by the professional sports teams, is what LeBron James has done in Akron with the I Promise School, which is really a public-private partnership between the Akron Public Schools and LeBron James Foundation and some corporate sponsors, but reinventing the way we address children who are at most risk, especially in the 3rd and 4th grade. And to what Dr. Gayle said, I think another great public-private partnership that has worked really well to help create wealth is what Singapore did with the Central Provident Fund. And we have the basics here in America of both the public and private policy to make that work. And I think if we look to Singapore and see what they did, maybe we can learn some lessons that can help us here.
Helene, you work on the front lines of health and social equity, both here in Chicago, and your experiences nationally and around the globe make you someone that we must come to now on the question on COVID. And specifically, what impact have wealth and education disparities had on health outcomes during this COVID pandemic in the Chicagoland area? And then take a step back and with 6 months of hindsight, going forward, working together, how should civil society, government, and foundations prioritize their actions and investments to appropriately and adequately achieve our shared goals of equitable access to health care?
Well, that's quite a lot. Let me try to answer that as succinctly as I can. in some ways, it reflects very much my life and my career. I started out as a pediatrician, and now I'm at a community foundation focused on wealth inequity. And, we know that what determines health largely has less to do with our health interventions. And so much of, what we call the social determinants of health probably make up somewhere between 50 to 85% of health outcomes. So we know that investing in other non-health aspects, like the ability to have access to a good income and a good paying job, having an education, safe neighborhoods, grocery stores that one can go to, et cetera. All of those things are the kinds of things that will really have a large impact on decreasing the health disparities that we see here. And, we know that Chicago has one of the largest life expectancy gaps of any city in the nation, 30 years between poor neighborhoods and some of the wealthier neighborhoods in Chicago. And COVID has clearly highlighted that. We have seen that Black and Latinx communities have been hit hardest by COVID, both because of the preconditions that people had, the other health conditions that make you more likely to become sick if you get COVID, but also because of the jobs that people work, the places that people live, all the ways in which people are not able to social distance and protect themselves, like so many of us who, have the opportunity to work from home or have PPEs and other things that keep us safe. So, the fact that people don't have control over the other aspects of their lives have really made poor communities, and particularly communities of color, at great risk. So that means that our solutions have to be grounded in those same aspects. And while we have to do everything that we can to make sure that there is high quality access to health services for communities of color that have not had that access, we also have to think about these broader social determinants of health, because at the end of the day, those have a greater impact on decreasing these disparities in life and life expectancy. So I think it's looking at it holistically. And again, back to some of the things that Keith mentioned about putting the different sectors together, because it will be philanthropic community, working with the business community, working with the public sector, that we're going to kind of find those solutions that are holistic and can make a difference in people's life outcomes.
And I'm looking at you, Dr. Farmer, and I can tell that you want to add something on to that. You were agreeing with Helene, but is there anything else that you'd like to interject here?
No, but I just get excited when she talks, so it's a good thing. I'm going to get back. I didn't think I would get to this, but I'm going to just get back to the simple fact of living in a human society is someone has to take care of the critically ill and injured. Yeah. And, if you look at social determinants of disease, their impact on health outcomes varies from time to time and place to place, of course, because we're talking about the way in which social context, which is historically given, whether you're talking about Chicago or rural Rwanda, that social context determines the degree to which social determinants will have their difference. And so, if you're in a community where, malaria is taking out children, or a place where COVID has suddenly become the primary determinant of adult mortality, communities across the world, but not in others, then you really have to do that homework. And again, this is something that Helene has taught us about over the years. You have to do that homework to understand the burden of disease, number one. What are the top 5 killers of young adults? What are the top 5 killers of children? All right. And then look at the gaps. Like, what is being ignored? And as Keith said, this requires, public, private players. If it involves school children, it involves schools and parents. It involves working, it involves employers and regulatory bodies. So I think that we're always going to be called to look hard at social determinants, and we always have to remember that someone is required to take care of the critically ill.
The clock says we're out of time, but I'm going to take the liberty of asking one more question for all of you. Today, economists argue that the economic crisis of the pandemic will last not years, but generations. And that in many countries, the detrimental impacts to the healthcare system will take years and billions of dollars to correct. As you consider all of our challenges in 2020, are there specific stories and lessons that we can learn from as we seek to build back better? I'd like one example from each of you. Let's start with you, Keith.
Well, I'm going to give you a kind of a generic example. It does tie back to what Dr. Farmer and Dr. Gayle both said. And that is that too often we rush into solutions before we have agreement as to what is the problem. And as we try to rebuild and restore a healthcare system, which, in the U.S. is almost 20% of our GDP, I guess, and where we have a lot of disruption and where we have a lot of issues of equal access to good healthcare, I think it's really would be valuable for America to first have a dialogue, maybe using some things like appreciative inquiry, to agree on what is the actual problem to be solved, and to agree on what success looks like. And I think although that takes some time, I have found in business time and time again that we move much faster when we agree on the problem than we do if we try to solve a problem on which we disagree or differ.
That's a great answer. Dr. Gayle, to you.
Yeah, so I would say two things. First of all, this is an economic crisis that was caused as a result of a health crisis. And so I think we first of all have to think about how do we shore up our health system, particularly our preventive health system, so that we wouldn't be in a situation like this again. We knew that something like the COVID pandemic was likely to occur, and we were not prepared. So first of all, I think we've got to put a big focus on prevention and preparedness, and remember that all of that money is worth it as we think about where we are today. And then I think on the economic side, I think it is building in economic resiliency, particularly thinking about people who are already financially and economically insecure, because those are the populations that are going to have the hardest time bouncing back. And I think we have a lot of really good examples of things that we as a nation said we would not do, that we have done as a result of this crisis, that we could put in place longer term. So for instance, we have unemployment protection that we've never really thought about or have resisted. We gave people cash to be able to pay their bills. We gave small businesses loans in much more flexible ways. We should take some of those examples and think about what do those mean in terms of building financial resiliency, particularly for people who are already financially insecure, and think about that as policy that we might do for the long run, because that means those same communities will be much more resilient when the next economic shock comes, and we know that it will, just like the next health shock. And so I think we need to think about preparedness both on the health side as well as the economic side.
Preparedness, working together. And Dr. Farmer, you get the last word.
Well, I mean, in medicine, when we go and see the work of another colleague who's seen a patient for us, we just write agree with above. So I agree with Pete. And, I think there are always lessons we can learn. And we just have to be committed to learning them, to documenting them, to sharing them and learning them. One of the things that we've taken inspiration from in our work in Massachusetts responding to COVID has been the Rwandan healthcare system, which is very focused on, community health workers, not to the detriment of clinical care. I mean, they've rolled out a care delivery system on a national level with very few resources, but they haven't neglected the prevention aspect either, including, considering social determinants of health and well-being. So I think there are lots of lessons, and some of them come from quarters where we wouldn't be looking for them. The COVID crisis has reminded us that some of the most affluent countries have had some of the worst responses, the least coordinated. And whether you're looking at case fatality rate or number of cases, you're not drawn to those examples as successful. Rwanda, on the other hand, has done a lot with a little.
And as someone who visits Rwanda a lot, it's good to hear you talk about the successes that they have achieved during this period. So, Mr. Keith Williams, Dr. Helene Gayle, Dr. Paul Farmer, as our audience listens to you tonight, I'm sure they recognize why the Chicago Council is recognizing your achievements with the Virtual Global Leadership Awards. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all you have done for humanity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know about you, but I could have at least spent another half an hour, an hour listening to those amazing people. Wonderful that we had the opportunity at least to do so. We've reached the end of the evening, and when I welcomed you earlier tonight, I hoped you would be inspired and encouraged. As I said, I certainly am, and if you are too, I urge you to hold what Paul and Helene and Keith said in your thoughts and in your actions. They set the example that change is possible, that we all must be active participants to shape a more just and equitable world. I encourage you to stay involved as the Council continues to build an inclusive and diverse community of individuals who seek to understand the challenges that affect Chicago, our nation, and the world. For those of you who are new to the Council tonight or supporting us for the first time, thank you, but stay engaged. Tune into an event, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on social media, listen to our latest podcast, Deep Dish. And please encourage a young person in your life to attend a virtual program. Better still, buy them a membership. We need the next generation to be involved in shaping our future. Someday, hopefully soon, we'll all be together in one place again. But until then, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, and good night.
Thank you.